Welcome to the Root Cause Business of Medicine podcast, where we explore what's broken in healthcare, but more importantly, what we can do about it. I'm Dr. Erik Lundquist, and I've been practicing functional medicine for the past 15 to 20 years. I'm excited to co-host this podcast series with my brother, Dr. Davin Lundquist,
who's just beginning his own journey into functional medicine. We come from different points on the path, but we share a common goal: to rethink how medicine is practiced and to help others do the same.
The U.S. healthcare system is in crisis. Rising costs, declining outcomes, and physician burnout are at an all-time high. But there is another way.
On this podcast, we dive into real stories from medical professionals who've stepped away from the traditional model, just like me, and found new purpose in integrative, functional, and alternative approaches to care.
These are authentic conversations with practitioners who've redefined success, not just for themselves, but for their patients and communities.
Whether you're a clinician feeling stuck, a student seeking direction, or simply curious about what else is possible,
you're in the right place. This is the Root Cause Business of Medicine podcast. Welcome to our second episode of the Root Cause of Business podcast. Today, our special guest is my brother, Davin Lundquist, and we're going to hear about his journey. Last week, you heard a little bit about my journey as we were talking about the interview last week, and in preparing for this podcast, we realized that there was so much that actually we didn't have time for. So what we may do down the road is we may have a specific topic podcast where we talk about certain aspects of developing a business that wouldn't necessarily have a guest. It'll just be Davin and I talking about our experiences in regards to that topic. So we'll let you know how that goes as time unfolds. But I'm excited to have the opportunity to have Davin share his story. You're just getting into this functional medicine space, right?
That's correct. Been watching you from afar for a while, and but finally, am actually getting into it myself, where I'm able to take advantage of some of these concepts with actual patients, which is exciting. And having been in a more of a traditional setting for over 20 years, I'm just so thrilled to be doing things a little differently now.
Yeah. So what would you say if, what pushed you over the edge, so to speak, in terms of making that leap, going from, you were super successful in your conventional medicine from a business standpoint. You had a great salary. You had some leadership opportunities. You were serving in an executive position, and then you were on you were the chief medical officer for a tech company developing AI scribe. So what caused you to kind of shift gears and say, all right, I can't take this anymore? Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, it's interesting. The desire to do functional medicine actually started, I don't know if you recall, but I think I attended a small weekend, conference where you gave one of your first talks, I think, down in Laguna or, some Dana Point or something. It's that, little hotel there. And I remember that was kind of my first exposure to it. And that's got to be at least a decade ago, I feel like.
Yeah, it was probably about 10 years ago.
And so I remember thinking at the time I was, knee deep in healthcare technology. I was kind of a new CMIO, relatively new. And so I was, I had this kind of new career path that was taking off for me in a way that I hadn't expected. But I remember having this thought, I'm like, well, if I ever get back to like full patient care, I definitely want to learn more about this. But I just didn't know if that would ever happen. I was pretty optimistic and bullish about my career in healthcare tech at the time. And so I kind of was like, wow, this is cool. It's interesting. I'm glad Erik's doing that. Happy for him, happy for his patients. but I'll just kind of table it, for now. So the seed was definitely planted, and I think it was obvious to me that there was a better way in terms of that, but I didn't have the capacity, if you will, at that time to sort of, dig into it enough to really make, wholesale changes in my practice. And I think at the time I was probably 80-20, where I was 80%, an executive, of my time was spent being an executive, and only, one day a week or something in clinic. So it was more to just kind of keep my hands in it than it was like trying to develop a new clinical model.
Yeah, and I think your experience is pretty consistent with, I think, a lot of people. Some of my colleagues who have transitioned into functional medicine out of conventional medicine world. There's an element. What do you think it is that makes that transition so difficult? Like why can't you? I mean, we went to medical school. We know how to take care of patients. Why is that transition so challenging? Why couldn't have you just said, okay, well, for the one day of clinic that I have, I'm just going to start practicing this way?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's not one thing. I think it's like multiple things, and I think part of it is maybe the last decade. There's some unique things about that, right? I think there was a time, back in the day when doctors had a lot more freedom and time to kind of practice the way they wanted. Unfortunately, with the financial pressures, especially in primary care, we've seen, increased rates of burnout, the challenges of, I think we were looking at primary care shortages into the future. The ability for even a traditional primary care doctor to have a private practice. They've been, over the last decade, moving into large medical groups and health system owned, groups in droves, right? I mean, and so that's been the trend. And I think then the onset of electronic medical records, I kind of, cut my teeth as an early CMIO on early stage meaningful use. I was literally in it from stage one, trying to get, millions of dollars for our organization to help offset the cost of implementing this EMR. And so you had to play the game, right? You had to play the game to get the money to pay for the technology that you sort of felt like you had to get. And so there were all these requirements that started to show up for people to sort of make them eligible. And it seemed like that was a huge shift in the entire industry, where not just from a meaningful use standpoint, but also the insurance companies, you started looking at like accountable care organizations and Medicare share savings. And all of a sudden we started getting all these extra requirements on us, again, with good intentions, looking at it from a population health standpoint, recognizing that we were lagging behind all the other developed countries in the world in terms of outcomes on a population basis. And so this seemed like the solution, right? Let's leverage our technology to influence, thousands of providers to do things differently and have an impact on outcomes. And yet, it didn't, I don't think, translate in the way that they thought, right? And so I think that combination of like more pressure financially to see more patients in smaller increments of time, more requirements from technology and insurance companies and Medicare to check boxes that didn't necessarily translate, but you didn't feel like you had a choice if you wanted to kind of survive in that environment. So all those things came together, and you just kind of get trapped in the system, and you're just trying to keep your head above water to some extent.
So do you think it was, so that sounds like that was a bit of a hindrance, a bit of an obstacle for you to kind of to transition, because you were now kind of buried in this quagmire of, this is kind of how I have to practice medicine, and this is how the game is played, and you're kind of stuck in the arena of the game, right? You're not from a spectator standpoint, you're not from a coaching managerial standpoint, you're in as a player involved with the day-to-day grind of it. And so you felt like that was an obstacle then for you kind of getting out of your position to do something. You knew there was something else out there. You felt like that was maybe going to be a better situation for you and your patients, but yet making that leap was difficult because of the circumstances you were in.
Exactly. And I don't think, it wasn't like I was consciously aware of it at the time, right?
Right.
Like I didn't recognize, oh, here's all these obstacles that are going to prevent me from practicing in a different way. I think I had an awareness that there was a better way that was interesting and I wished I could learn more. But I was actually at the time, again, with good intentions, I felt like, hey, I can make a difference by optimizing the technology, right? By making the technology easier. And, our saying was make the right way, the easy way, right? So we were trying to create technology that was easy for doctors to adopt and use in a way that was productive and effective and would deliver good care. And so that was kind of that's what I was chasing, was that dream of like, this world where technology could make medicine better for everybody, right? And so with good intentions, I had put that on the shelf, but looking back now, right? Looking back at it through a different lens, I can see how I just kind of got stuck in that sort of mindset and in this sort of dream that ironically, I had to leave that whole system in order to feel like I can actually use technology in the way that I had kind of originally imagined it. And it's related to, getting out of that system that unfortunately, I think is more the problem than the actual doctors in it, who I think are there with good intentions, with a desire to do the right thing and make the lives of their patients better, but they just can't get out from under the weight of that system.
That's super interesting. And I want to get back to kind of your transition from the conventional world into and tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. But before we do that, I want to leverage your experience in the informatics and technology world. And do you see, we're going to talk about AI just for a minute here, as a little bit of a tangent, but do you see AI as a facilitator on conventional medicine practitioners being able to transition easier into the functional medicine world?
Absolutely. I think it should allow, people to move so much faster. And I think having been in the space now, the company that I worked for was doing medical documentation even before ChatGPT hit the market. We were leveraging humans and using technology to connect. It's kind of a labor arbitrage scenario where we were able to connect lower cost labor in other parts of the world to help support doctors here in doing their work. And then over time, we were making the technology sort of observe and learn from that process and become smarter and smarter. And then when, OpenAI and et cetera hit, it just accelerated that process, extremely. And now, there are a dime a dozen now, technologies that say, hey, we'll do your notes for you, right? And in every vertical, not just healthcare. So, and so we have, studied AI. I personally have studied it and sort of what is its role. I've been on webinars where people have asked me, what is the role of AI in healthcare? And I do think that as physicians, we shouldn't be worried about AI replacing us, as long as we're sort of willing and open to the fact that I think AI can be a member of the care team, right? Like we can use it in a way where let's leverage its strengths and have it complement ours, right? And I think as humans and as physicians, we have the ability to connect. We have intuition. We have the art of medicine, right? And I think functional medicine requires even more art, if you will. And so having AI to say, okay, help us analyze all the data, help us understand how to approach the data, how to approach the patient's history. We can learn to do that so much faster than, years and years of studying like you had to do.
Exactly. Exactly. I think I think it's really exciting. I agree. I think it's something we should be celebrating, not necessarily fearing. I mean, there's obviously within realm of everything, there's always unknowns, but I think AI is just going to facilitate our ability to leverage the knowledge that we have in a way that's going to help us better connect with our patients and use kind of the talents and gifts that we have from a healing perspective. I mean, put those into action, right? I mean, part of what I would guess from the patients that saw you in a very busy practice still came back to see you and wanted to maintain a connection with you when you transitioned to your new practice, which we'll hear about in just a minute. But that was your emotional connection, is somewhat your spiritual connection with them, and they're wanting to have somebody else help them in that health journey, right? And it's having the knowledge is one thing. There's plenty of books out there. You can now go to Chat GPT and say, all right, this is my problem. What's the best treatment option? But you need some other human to connect you and guide you. And I think we'll never get rid of that. So yeah, that's super interesting. So tell us now exactly kind of what you're doing. And then as a second part to that, and you can answer this part first if you want, what was it then that drove you to say, and now is the time? Like was it burnout? Was it the opportunity to do something different? You were just was it a change in your opportunities? What was it kind of drove you? And then tell us what you're doing now.
Yeah. So what's interesting is the other day I was giving a lecture workshop, and I wanted to kind of give a brief overview of my story of how I kind of got to where I was. And I had this kind of little light bulb go off, and I realized that there's an analogy between functional medicine, which is all about getting to the root cause, and with my own life, getting to the root cause of what was maybe not going right in my own life, maybe not just from a health standpoint. I've been fortunate to be pretty healthy. But my life went through a period of time where you could say that my circumstances were sick. And, I found myself, 5 or 6 years ago, struggling at work. I was in an executive role, but just not finding my way, feeling like I wasn't meeting expectations, disappointing people. And then also at home, family life, relationship wasn't going well. It eventually ended up, going through a divorce. I'm feel bad for anybody that's ever had to go through that. It's a very difficult experience. Financially, that created some additional stress. And at one point I remember just looking at my life and thinking, how did I get here? Like, how is it that, I'm living by myself in a beat up apartment, without a family, my job is at risk. And I just kind of had this moment where I'm like, okay, so obviously something's not right here. I need to really look at my life and figure out what's wrong. And so in a way I kind of did I got to the root cause of what was wrong in my life. Right. And, I realized that, I had created all those circumstances for myself. And I kind of went on this journey of self-exploration and a kind of a spiritual journey, kind of a rebirth for me spiritually. And, some instrumental books that I'm sure people have probably read as well, but The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and another book, Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins, were two that were very instrumental in kind of shifting my consciousness and awareness, in a different path. And I started to kind of look at my life holistically, if you will. Right. And, one thing led to another. I started, reading more books and thought leadership around, what really allows people to be successful in life, and not on the outside, but on the inside. Right. And the more I kind of studied all of that, I also realized that, from a business standpoint, right, there was one of my mentors, Peter Sage, who was a former elite trainer with, Tony Robbins. And then he went on to do his own thing. And I really admire the way he communicates. And he was describing how if you work for somebody else, then they're not paying you your full value, because if they were, it wouldn't make sense for their business. They have to be making a little bit of a margin off of you to justify paying you that salary for their business to work. And then also, as physicians, to your point earlier, you mentioned that, I've been successful in that model. I was actually one of the most productive doctors in our health system in an RVU, fee for service, quote, eat what you kill model. But, one, I wasn't satisfied on the inside. And two, I didn't feel like I was really being rewarded for my value, because here I am, I'm an employee. So there's a margin there. And I think the combination of all these things, right, was what really started to push me out of that system. Like, okay, there's got to be a better way. Now I'm a divorced, male paying, half of my income to taxes and let alone not even getting the full value of
how long do you think that process was? Like, at what point did you start kind of saying, all right, things aren't right with myself first. I'm having this awareness. And when you had that awareness, were you immediately thinking, oh, I'm going to jump ship and start practicing medicine different? Or, as you started exploring this realm of self-transformation, you realized you needed a practice transformation?
Yeah, I think, it happened over a few years, right? I went through my divorce and everything actually during the pandemic. So, there was that as well, that small thing that happened, the pandemic. And so, there were a lot of things that, that how healthcare just changed so dramatically during that time as well, right? That, the advent of telehealth being sort of now widely accepted and reimbursed. And then I think just people beginning to question the system, right? And so it kind of allowed me to also kind of have a little bit of a more open mind around sort of questioning, the model that I was in. And is this really the best way? Is this really the best thing for our country, for people on an individual basis? And then as part of that, I think I kind of stepped away from my administrative duties, and kind of went back to full-time primary care, still in the older model though, the traditional model. And I think that's where, it was sort of like a little pressure cooker of like, seeing 30 patients a day and in this other model. And to your point, I did my best. I feel like I've always been pretty good at being more of a collaborative type physician than a paternalistic. It wasn't sort of my way or the highway. I always had the approach of, hey, you come to me. I never really minded, Dr. Google being the first consult and I could be the second consult. I was never intimidated by that or bothered by that. I think it was like, hey, it's your health. If you have ideas, let's talk about it. Teach me what you're thinking. Let me know. Let me help you help yourself, right? Like I'm a resource for you. But then it just became the constraints, right? The short visits, wanting to teach them more lifestyle things, start to introduce that, but then feeling like I didn't really know what to even to tell them, like I hadn't really learned what I needed to tell them. And then, you didn't really have the ability to see them back on a regular basis because in the insurance model, you can't just see somebody and just talk to them about wellness. Like if you have to be able to chart like something's wrong or you did something, you could, but from a financial standpoint, there's not as big of an incentive to spend time getting people off medicine, getting them healthy, because you're going to get paid less for those visits. And so it just felt like, I was kind of beating my head against the wall. I'm like in a system that's no longer matching up with, what I wanted to do. And I think in my own life, feeling this desire to transform myself from the inside and understanding the power of like frequency in your mind, and the energy that you have. I just, realized that, that frequency beats chemistry, and the medicine that people, were on in that system, it just didn't align anymore. And it was time for a change.
So tell us what you're doing now and how long you've been doing it and how it's evolved since you kind of got started.
Yeah. So, as we talked about, I was working part-time for a tech company. And so, I will say that made it easier. It wasn't like I just like quit my practice and then, was like, okay, let's hope something works here. Because I had this other part-time and income, I was able to kind of take my time exploring a few different things. So I started out actually, I knew one thing for sure. The only thing I really knew for sure was that I wasn't going to take insurance. that I knew. I wanted to sort of untether myself from all the rules and the regulations and the restrictions that insurance would imply. And so pretty early on, I also discovered that you can't just start charging cash to people if they have Medicare. So a little tip that's really important for people making that transition is make sure you consult a lawyer, talk to them about what you need to do to opt out of Medicare so that you don't get yourself in some kind of legal trouble offering cash services that are a covered benefit of Medicare if you're still a Medicare provider. So
I think it's an important point. I just want to highlight that again and just take a moment to talk about the fact that when you are transitioning, if you choose to do that, into a cash-based practice, it's really important that you look at what the medical legal ramifications of that are. And to kind of elaborate a little bit of what you were alluding to, if you are contracted with Medicare and you bill a patient cash for what you're already contracted for, you're actually in violation of your contract. And that is illegal. You can't do that. I mean, there are two ways you can get in trouble in practicing medicine. One is fraudulent, is when you basically are billing out services, or you're saying you're billing in an individual or insurance company for services that you are not providing. The second is when you are contractually bound to the insurance company for providing services with a patient, and then you make them pay additional for those same services, right? And that's where it gets a little muddy. In having a lawyer clearly delineate that, there are cash-based concierge type practices that are still billing insurance, but collecting a membership fee, and we'll be interviewing some practitioners who are doing that. You're doing a form of concierge we'll get to in a minute, but in terms of still billing out insurance. So there are caveats to that, and it's really important to get somebody who understands that the legal ramifications involved there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think, this may be one of our topics, right? Where as we get into like cash versus insurance, because you've been able to do functional medicine, in an insurance model. And there's definitely pros and cons to it. So we'll debate that at some other time. But for me, it just made sense. And also, again, having, worked in healthcare technology, and, working remotely for another company in San Francisco, I felt like for me, rather than taking, money, a lot of capital to like open an office and have like a brick and mortar type, practice, that I would go virtual to begin with. But for people that were in the area, I would offer home visits. So it's kind of I don't know if anyone actually has this model out there, but it was virtual plus home visits. And I didn't have an office. And I had
Very low overhead.
very low overhead. That was my goal, was to keep the overhead very low. And so it basically just came down to an EMR, a communication tool, and my malpractice, right? And it was, and so,
And so did you like come up with a business plan to kind of help you figure that out, or was it just kind of like, this is where I am and out of necessity, this is what I'm doing?
it's yeah. I'm not going to win the award for the most sophisticated entrepreneur for sure. I kind of jumped first, and then said, I'll figure out how to work the parachute sort of on the way down. But again, I had the luxury of this other job, right? So that was part-time. So I didn't want to overcommit and just get myself back in the same mess, right? I didn't want to have to because there were companies that will come in and say, hey, we'll get you started on a concierge practice. And then they take some, crazy percentage of your revenue, right? For who knows how long. And so I didn't want to get back in the same mess of just feeling like, hey, I had to, crank to be able to, cover the bills. And so I wanted to take my time and really understand what it was that I wanted to do. Like, how could I really accomplish what was authentic for me? So I had that luxury of a little bit of time, right? And so I was experimenting with this idea of just, getting to know word of mouth patients who had known me from before. Hey, here's a new model. I'm going to be able to spend all kinds of time with you. It's sort of unlimited access to me. I'll come to your house. I'll come to your office. I think the very first patient I had who signed up was a lawyer. I went to his office, right? And I spent 2 hours the first day just collecting information from him. And it was just the coolest experience to just feel like a free agent, or I could just do whatever I thought he needed, and with really no constraints, right? And then that grew a little bit slowly. There was a lot of interest. I experimented with a few different price points, trying to figure out what the market could sustain in my area. And then I was also thinking, hey, I need to get into social media. Maybe I can build this from an online standpoint and make it a little more scalable, be able to reach and affect more people. So I started learning about that. How do I get started with that? I wish I could sit here and tell you I figured it out and now I'm like a very successful, influencer. But it's been a slow process, but I've learned a ton and I've made a lot of headway there. And so today, where I'm at, just to sort of fast forward a little bit, is now, I've partnered with another doctor here in town who has a successful direct primary care offering, which I kind of think of as like a concierge light model. And so it's still that monthly membership. We don't take insurance. It's sort of unlimited primary care plus we can practice the way that we want. All three of us that are working out of that office have a traditional primary care background, but we've all sort of seen the light, if you will, and are approaching people from a systems based, holistic, functional medicine approach, and I'm loving it.
That's great. And if you were to go back and start over, if you take a year and a half rewind to where you were, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself to say, okay, this is I would be able to speed up the process. Obviously there's an aspect of it that just time alone is the experience we need to develop ourselves in a new business. But what were some of the things that you wish you had known that would have helped move along? How would you have done things differently?
Yeah, I think let's say that I didn't have this other job, right? And then I just was going to, dive in full speed into my practice. And in some ways, it might have been better, that way, because I would have been just ultra focused and I would have had the pressure to, really build that up, quicker. But I think what I would have probably done differently, and if I went back, how I would do it now is I would say, you know what, I'm not, I think I had too much expectation of sort of becoming sort of my new self, like right away, right? Like I wanted to learn enough to where I could really market myself as more of a functional medicine holistic doctor. And I think if I were to go back, I would say, you know what, why don't I build on my strength and just create a practice that's just fix one thing at a time, right? Like break free from the insurance model, create a cash-based membership model, collect patients who know me, who identify with who I am and how I practice, and then slowly, begin to incorporate the functional medicine pieces as I learned them. And I think that might have been a better way to sort of transition. I would have, and I think in my experience, people who are expecting traditional primary care I haven't found anybody that didn't welcome a more holistic or systems-based approach. So I think that would be my advice to anyone else, who is trying to make that transition, is don't feel like you have to be the expert, right away. You can be who you are today and slowly make that transition with your patients, the following that you may already have. And that would probably have been a smoother transition. And, maybe we can have a blooper session where we talk about all the missteps that we've made as well along the way that are probably the bigger lessons, right, than the successes, for sure.
I love that. All right. Well, I think we're going to close. And what I want to do is start a new tradition in our second episode. And the tradition is asking our guests, if you, it's kind of a twofold question. And maybe we'll refine this as we go, because I'm totally doing this off the cuff, which is usually not a good thing. But if you could change the overall business of medicine from a big perspective, what would that look like for you? And two, the second part of the question is, how do you feel like the future of medicine is moving in terms of the type of practice that you have? Is that going to be commonplace? Kind of weigh in a little bit on your predicting the future.
Awesome. Since this is partly my podcast too, I'm going to add something to our tradition.
Oh, good. It's just a beginning tradition.
I know, right? I mean, why not?
It's only going to be a tradition on the third episode. It's actually just an initiation right now.
Well, until we make up a new one.
Right.
And forget all about this one. So something I think I believe maybe we should put it in there earlier in the discussion, but I think I would love to hear everybody's why, their why in medicine. So I'm going to briefly share mine. And I think it relates to the other two questions that you just had. So, to me, and I actually had discovered this why for myself about 10 years ago, and it was on the informatics side, right? But I realized one day when I just felt amazing. Like I had a day where I just felt so good. I had a good night's sleep. My mind was alert. I had energy. I was just feeling super fit. I had some great connections with people that day, and it just seemed like the ideas were just nonstop. And I felt like I could conquer the world, on that day. And it occurred to me that as humans, when we feel that way physically and mentally, what is it that goes through our head? Like, where do we turn our attention when we feel that good? And it's usually towards our dreams. That's when we feel like we can chase our dreams and we can conquer the world. And so one of my favorite quotes in sort of my new business is, I think, attributed to Confucius. I actually heard it from Tony Robbins first. And it is, a healthy person has 1,000 dreams and a sick person has only one. And so my why is, if I can help more and more people unlock more days of feeling that incredible health and vitality, that's more people who are chasing their dreams. And wouldn't that be an amazing world that we would have if that happened more often than it does today? And so then if I think about the healthcare system, right, like that should be the business model. That should be the goal of our healthcare system, right? Rather than at a population level, preventing, or, treating as much disease as we possibly can with the limited resources that we have and kind of catering to the lowest common denominator, which is, I think, the way that our healthcare system has evolved here in America. Is it's like, yeah, let's just do the minimum that's needed to sort of hit the masses, right? And kind of keep, but they're not looking at how we got into that mess, to begin with. And so I think, the food industry and other things, I'm not into politics, but clearly there's some bigger influences at work that have got us into that mess. And so that the system, I think, has reacted to that, right? And they're just trying to do the best they can for, the least common, denominator. And now I get patients coming into my practice who are motivated to change, right? If they're willing to pay money out of their own pocket and not just rely on their insurance, that tells me they're motivated to do something with their health, right? Like they're a little bit different than the lowest common denominator, model. So those are kind of my thoughts around our system and how it could be better. I don't claim to be smart enough to know, a perfect solution, but I do think things like direct primary care are going to have a big impact. And I think, hitting and re-educating, people around the things in our environment, including the food, could have huge impact.
Well, I love that. And I think it's a great place to end. I think we'll probably talk more and more about this in future episodes, future podcasts. But I have to be encouraged by the fact that we have Robert Kennedy in really just uprooting the tradition of the HHS and bringing people in who are implementing that root cause medicine. We're with Casey Means as a Surgeon General, and Dr. Bhattacharya in the FDA. I mean, there's a lot of influence for reason and good, and not just, this is the way we've done it forever, so this is the way we need to keep doing it. I think all of those things are going to make some really positive change. But I love what you said. Yep. A sick person only has one dream. We want to get people to where they're dreaming again. And that's part of the purpose of this podcast, right? We're hoping that any of you practitioners who are listening, and even if you're patients and you want to encourage your practitioner to start making some changes, or you go out and find a practitioner who's doing some of the things that Davin talked about today, and we encourage you to do that. We want people dreaming. We want that the world will be a much better place when we are all chasing our dreams, because there's some amazing things that people can think up as we're already experiencing in the technology world and in other aspects. So thank you. That was awesome. I loved, there was details of that story that I hadn't heard before, which was really, really good. And I look forward to continuing this podcast with you. And we're looking forward to our next guest, who is a pediatrician. He is still in the insurance world, and yet he's practicing functional medicine with an underserved population. So it's going to be really interesting to get Dr. Magritta's perspective on this. And so we hope you'll join us for the next episode.